of the talks from Ted, who came all the way from LA, who is hopefully going to be headed back to LA if he can get out in the snow. So they are just over there. Buy them for cheap. So last but not least, you're here to see Scott Moulton, and he is going to talk to you about DIY hard drive diagnostics. Enjoy. Give him a hand.
Everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Check, check. Everybody good? Okay. And I'll have some sounds and stuff I'm going to play off my laptop today, so it'll be the first time I tried to do that at a con, I think, other than if anybody saw my recover porn from Raideray. Anybody see that one? Yeah? Where I'm juggling, there's like porn going on? Yeah? Okay. All right. Anybody seen any of the other videos and stuff I've done? It's like my 4th or 5th year here at SMUCon. Anything? Yeah? Everybody good? All right, so my intent here is to kind of make like a series of videos that when you watch them in order, that it will be like this epic adventure for data recovery that you will know how to do some 80% of the drives by yourself without having to send them off to a data recovery company. And of course, I have data recovery companies that are pissed off at me for this. So I try to get straight to the meat and potatoes. I don't want to spend 35 minutes talking about a VMware DD image. So just in case you want to know. So ultimately, I have some goals for this talk. The first thing is obviously, who the heck am I? Why is this Charlie Brown looking guy up here, trying to tell you about data recovery? I do data recovery for a living. I own a company called myharddrivedied.com, which has been around, thank you. I have like 50 hours of video out there that's free, that's published, all on in-depth stuff. It's not fluff, it's not crap. It's the real stuff. So if you want to go look at how to do RAID arrays or whatever else, I have demos and everything out there. And it's not like marketing crap or anything, it's real shit. So that's the first thing. I also run a forensics company side by side. We do alternating work between the two. So I do a lot of forensic work, a lot of data recovery jobs that are damaged drives in forensics cases. So if you want to know some more, go to those. But I also teach classes. So if you like what I'm doing in an hour, well then, if you want more and you don't want to wait for the next con, because it's a series of events over 5 years so far. The next one's going to be in Outer Zone next month in Atlanta. March 20th. So I'll have some cards and stuff up here for Outer Zone. If you guys want to come up and get one, you'll find out where it is, what it is. It's a small con, but I'm going to be doing a new talk there next month on data recovery. So the first thing is I want to make sure that when you walk out of this room, you at least know something new. Not like just want to make sure you know something new you didn't know. So hopefully everybody will know something when they walk out of here, and hopefully a whole lot. Make sure that you know when to stop doing data recovery. That's my biggest problem now is I've done this series of events where I started at higher end stuff. Now I'm actually going backwards. I'm going back to the beginning and saying, look, this is stuff you should have known in the first place before you got to the other advanced videos because of the emails and stuff I get on a daily basis now. Oh, I took the platters out or I took the heads out and I want to replace them and it's too late now. Sorry. So I want to make sure you know when to stop and say, look, I can't do this problem. And I give you specific examples so you know why. This is obviously about as cheap as possible. So this is not about I bought a $15,000 tool and here's how to use it. I will give some quick, short examples of what the difference is, but ultimately the whole point is I'm trying to teach you how to do a lot of your own stuff without having to spend, even in excess of $100 if you can avoid it. And then I'm going to tell you about some things that suck, that get in our way. So there's lots of ugly text in this speech. If you want copies, they're already posted. I do not expect you to remember everything I say, so like flowcharts and stuff that I have up here that are really ugly, I've already posted on my site. So if you go to myharddrivedied.com/shmooCon.html, it's already there, PDF, ready to go, download it. You can look at it now if you want. But that way you don't have to remember. And if you don't remember shmooCon.html, then you just go to myharddrivedied.com presentations and it's at the top. So it'll automatically be there. All right, so anyway, so this is the basics of what I'm trying to cover today. Like, these are the 5 major issues that you have to deal with when you're dealing with a hard drive and you want to know what's wrong with it. A lot of people will go, plugged in the hard drive, I don't get any user data. So what happened between there and not seeing my user data? That's what I'm focusing on here. So do you have a firmware problem? You got head damages, boards are problems, motors, things like that. Where do you start? Where do you stop? And then do I actually have platter damage? So it's not always going to be this obvious, okay? This is obvious, and if you're doing this, we're going to be dealing with either some soldering. You can't just swap boards in some cases, and there are going to be some chips and stuff that you have to solder in certain cases. There are certain drives that you can just swap boards, but we're going to talk about those. So I can't just jump straight into diagnostics. I got to back up a step and have to say, hey, look, what do you know now, and how do you sort of derive what these things are, especially if you don't have any fancy tools? So keep in mind there are these fancy tools. You can just plug stuff in, and it tries to give you like a summary of what's wrong with the drive. And you still have to know something. It's still not like completely like, here's one button, and it comes up and tells you, oh, I got a firmware problem or something. You still have to know quite a bit to make that happen. So in 10 minutes, I'm going to try to make just kind of like a, and it may be 15 minutes, I don't know, a little bit of a basic idea about how we're dealing with what type of problem. So the first thing is, if you have a hard drive and it's dead, the very first thing that happens is somebody goes, oh, I want to swap heads. I think it's a head problem. I want to swap heads. I'm trying to stop you before you get that far to say, let's don't swap parts. Even boards, you have to be very careful with going buying an identical drive and then swapping the board. And I know I've said that in some previous events, but some newer things have come out lately that can cause damage with the boards. And in certain drives like Western Digital's, you may need to unsolder a chip and move it. And it may not do damage if you swap the board, but it's not going to work either. So without that, you need to know that. So I want to make sure you know, if you're thinking about swapping parts, when do we actually discuss that? Where are we actually going to talk about practicing with the drive? And I get these emails all the time too. I got this one drive in from my client. It's not working right. Where do I buy a donor drive so I can swap heads? This is not like in 5 minutes I learned how to swap a head. It's not easy. This is like go get a dozen hard drives and go play with them and figure out how to do it first and make it work. I do not want to, in any way, shape, or form, tell people you don't need to practice. I mean, that was never the intent at all. It was always go get a dozen drives, rebuild a working drive back to a working state, and then you might actually be ready to do that. But don't do it on the client drive. They always practice later. Like, oh, I tried that, now it doesn't work, and now they try another drive, and it's too late. So anyway, so that's what we're trying to do. So over the years of doing data recovery and going through this process and then developing a class that, I do teach at some FBI agents and things like that, teaching a class, I basically have these 5 steps. And there's this one that loops back. So in the diagnostics process, I end up looping back like, hey, if it works, we're already in the process of imaging and copying sectors. And if that works, we continue on. But if not, then we're going to repair the drive and we're going to start all over again and loop back through this particular process. So what our goal is, primarily, is imaging. Now, I know a lot of you are, who's done forensics imaging? Yeah, you're all doing it wrong. All right. Well, not you. Okay. He's not doing it wrong because we've been educated. So anyway, so ultimately the point is when you do a forensics image and you use something like, I don't know, DD, FTK image or whatever, when you're doing an image and it gets to a bad sector, what happens? What is it? Yeah, it either stops and dies, or what does it put there if it's able to continue? Zeros, right? There was data there, right? There was data there. So if you got 512 bytes, and let's just say one is wrong, if you could still get the rest, that doesn't make the rest wrong, right? So there's still a process in which you do not have to pad all of that data. There's still a couple of things that you can actually do to read from those damaged sectors. So if I'm able to do that, say ignoring ECC or getting some other content back and filling those sectors, and it's not 0, it's got to be better than 0, right? The other problem with 0 is that 0 doesn't indicate anything different than the rest of the unallocated space on the drive that was 0 in the first place. So unless you're writing like bad, bad, bad there, you don't know the difference between what was a bad sector and then what you need to fill in versus empty space that was already 0 in the first place. Not that it's always 0, because sometimes there's just unallocated crap out there that you got to recover from. But ultimately, our point is we got to stop thinking about files. For the most part, I want to forget about files, and I'll kind of show you some cool stuff that includes files. But ultimately, I deal with sectors. So this way, I don't have to care if it's an encrypted drive. I don't have to care if it's, what is on the drive or what OS it is. I can almost always deal with the sectors. Even if I'm doing an AS400, like anybody know what size? Like everybody knows, the physical size of a sector is 512 bytes. Anybody know what size a sector is on an AS400? 500 what? 522. It's 522. So the other 10 is ECC stuff in there that you can just strip out. But what happens if you hook up 522 byte hard drive to a write blocker? What is a write blocker? Anybody know? What is it? A write blocker is a piece of hardware with software running on it that then intercedes so that it can pass that along. So the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to lock up or crash. You won't get a response from your write blocker, but it doesn't mean you can't copy those sectors. So I'm just making an example here that there's actually ways that you can actually go through this imaging process dealing with sectors. Forget about files and other stuff. It doesn't matter what you're dealing with. So let's get rid of this crap. These are things that suck. So we're going to talk about these things that suck and get them out of the way first. So a lot of the imaging tools, the things like vendor tools, microscope things, software repair tools, the freezing, a drive, ATA components, smart, things like that. Those all suck. So what is wrong with these things? Huh? Cost money? Well, that's true. They do cost money. But besides that they cost money, what else is wrong with them? Is there anything really that different amongst any of these products? I mean, they all basically do exactly the same thing. But what are they all going to do when the drive fails? Ruin your data. Maybe. It's possible. They're going to fail too. Almost all of those tools that are imaging things, when they actually hit a damaged disk that has more than a couple of bad sectors or something, they usually fail too. And they may even fail only on one bad sector. It may show you a little thermometer, it'll go across, it'll read where there's a bad sector, and then from then on, you'll just get this file that was full of zeros that a thermometer told you I was done, but not really have any data. So they typically fail on those drives as well. So almost all of those just like off-the-shelf commercial imaging products with a few exceptions, but for the most part, they will fail. So there are more robust, free / even some expensive ways of doing this so that you can actually be talking to the drive with bad sectors and still be able to copy stuff. There's some simple things that you could do like read a drive in reverse with PIO mode. You may actually get sectors that could not be copied other ways for free. There may be a way to do that. Usually you have to have a tool to redirect that. So there's a lot of these that I have in the top like MyRescue, DD Rescue. Those are free tools, Linux-based. Then there's Media Tools Pro, that's a Windows tool that's actually fairly expensive, like $300 or whatever. SpeedClone's like $40. Those will read drives in reverse and do a couple of different things. And there's a couple of dozen tools out there if you search for them correctly that you will find. And then there's even like the Ultimate Boot CD, which has some helpful tools on it. The important one to me that's on the Ultimate Boot CD that's free is MHDD. Because with MHDD, it's actually doing diagnostics where it bypasses, in some instances, the BIOS talks to the ATA controller. So even if your drive doesn't show up in the BIOS itself, you may still be able to communicate with the drive, scan it for bad sectors, or spit stuff out to a file, sectors to a file, so that you can actually parse them and do other stuff. So there is some possibility of talking to your ATA controller, bypassing your BIOS, because basically the BIOS that's on your computer does a very stupid thing with regards to drives. So there are other solutions with hardware, even some what I call low-cost solutions, but they're not cheap. The DeepStar Disk Imager, PSI Clone, other things that are forensics tools where people are already spending like $1,000 to $2,000 on TDIs or Voom hard copies and stuff. Those really don't recover from bad sectors either, but there are tools that do forensics images that do recover from bad sectors. But I'm going to give you just a quick example. This is a small video, and basically what's going to happen is when FTK Imager or any software or anything is going forward on a drive, in a lot of cases it will fail because of problems with, like, for instance, cache on the drive. I covered that in some other talks, where cache is caching in advance on the drive, and if it hits a bad sector, it's either going to skip it, fail, or do whatever, and you're going to get chunks of data that it can't read, and most of the time, FTK Imager or any of the tools based on DD will just fail and never recover. And so this is a tool, this is a piece of hardware that's kind of like a BitTorrent. It doesn't care where the sectors come from, it doesn't care what order that they're in, but it'll go forward and try to read the sectors that are good as fast as it can, but in reverse, it will try to read the ones and fill in the holes of the sectors that were bad that it couldn't read the first time around, filling in those holes as it goes. So you're going to see from this. So, and I actually get a display in hex as it's doing this. All the brown ones are ones that were going forward that it failed, and so now going in reverse, I'm actually able to fill in these holes and actually see that in hex as it's going by, fixing a lot of the things in the disk. Now this particular tool is called the DeepStar Disk Imager. There are some ways to do this in software, like DD Rescue tries something very similar in Linux. If you understand how to use the tool and do what you need to do, you may actually be able to accomplish this. Unfortunately, in most cases, it's not like spitting this out in hex, giving you some good feedback or something, but you can play around with it. But this is just an example of ways to actually get around that problem. So when you're dealing with other tools like Microscope and the vendor tools, like anybody run like C tools or anything on their stuff? Anybody ever run that? Like, what does it tell you on your bad hard drive? What does it say? What? It says it failed the test. Yeah, it says fail the test, and it gives you what? Just like a generic number, right? It just says 523. Have you ever called tech support and asked them what that meant? What do they say? They go, oh, that's a generic error. We don't know what it means either. Just send it in. It's under warranty or something like that. That's about the best you get. So most of the time, those tools won't tell you very much either. Very few of those tools will actually give you like a real indication of what's wrong. Same thing for a microscope and the other tools where you pay, several $100s for a tool to examine your drive. They only are meant to work on working drives. They really don't work very well on